Airports are places of movement and connection, where thousands of people pass through each day, heading toward new beginnings or returning home. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the terminals are nearly deserted and the hum of activity fades, a different side of these spaces reveals itself. Strange occurrences, eerie sightings, and inexplicable events remind us that not all journeys have a clear destination, and some passengers never truly leave. These are 4 chilling stories of unsettling experiences in airports, where the unknown lingers just beyond the gates. Happening number 1, the Gatekeeper's Terminal. It was a year ago when I worked as a nighttime janitor at a small regional airport. The job was mostly uneventful, quiet terminals, empty hallways, and the hum of vending machines were my only companions. But one night, during my shift, I encountered something that still chills me to this day. It was around 2 a.m., and I was finishing up in Terminal C, a section of the airport that hadn't been used in years. Budget cuts had led to its closure, and now it was mostly storage for old equipment. But I had to sweep and mop it weekly to keep up appearances. The moment I entered, something felt off. The air was colder than usual, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. As I started sweeping, I heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. "Hello?" I called out, expecting one of the security guards. No response. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the quiet. But as I continued working, the footsteps grew louder, coming closer. I turned toward the source of the sound, only to see an empty hallway stretching into darkness. Uneasy, I finished cleaning as quickly as I could. But as I walked toward the exit, I noticed something strange. One of the old gates, Gate C14, had its door slightly ajar. That was odd, considering it had been sealed shut for years. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over and peeked inside. The gate area was dark, except for one flickering overhead light. In the faint glow, I saw what looked like a person sitting at the far end of the waiting area, facing away from me. "Sir? You're not supposed to be here," I said, trying to sound authoritative. The figure didn't move. Feeling nervous, I stepped closer, but the closer I got, the colder the air became. It wasn't until I was just a few feet away that I realized something horrifying. The figure wasn't sitting. It was floating. Before I could react, the figure turned its head toward me. Its face was obscured, like a shadow that swallowed all light. My heart raced as I stumbled back, barely able to keep my balance. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from inside my own head, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the main terminal where the security office was. The guard on duty must have seen the panic on my face because he asked what happened. I tried explaining, but he just shook his head and said, "You're not the first person to see something in Terminal C." I quit the job the next day. To this day, I refuse to fly out of that airport, especially at night. Whatever I saw that night at Gate C14 was not meant to be disturbed. Happening number 2, the runaway passenger. A few years ago, I was on a layover during a red-eye flight. My next plane wouldn't board until 6 a.m., leaving me stuck in a near-deserted airport for hours. Most travelers were either asleep on benches or wandering the shops that remained open late into the night. Around 3 a.m., I decided to stretch my legs and explore. I wandered toward a less populated wing of the airport, where the lights seemed dimmer and the hum of activity faded. It wasn't completely abandoned. There were occasional workers and passengers milling about, but it felt off. As I passed a shuttered cafe, I noticed a woman standing at the end of the corridor near Gate 49. She was staring out the large windows that overlooked the runway. Something about her struck me as strange. Her clothes looked outdated, like something out of the 1950s, and she was completely still, not even shifting her weight like people usually do when standing for a long time. I hesitated but decided to approach. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I asked. She didn't respond or even acknowledge me. Her head tilted slightly as if she was focusing on something far in the distance. I looked out the window but saw nothing unusual, just empty runways under the glow of floodlights. Feeling uneasy, I stepped closer and tried again. "Ma'am, do you need help?" This time, she turned to face me, and I felt my blood run cold. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they didn't seem right. They were dark, hollow, and empty, as if they weren't meant for seeing but for something else entirely. Before I could react, she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, I heard a faint whisper, like a breeze moving through the terminal. I took a step back, and as I did, the lights in the corridor flickered. When they stabilized, she was gone. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the empty space where she had been. Finally, I turned and hurried back toward the main terminal, my heart pounding. Later, as I waited at my gate for my flight, I overheard a group of employees talking. One of them mentioned Gate 49, saying it was rumored to be haunted by a woman who had missed her flight decades ago and died trying to catch it. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know more. All I could think about was her hollow eyes and the chill that had settled in my bones. I've flown many times since that night, but I always avoid exploring during layovers. Some parts of an airport are best left alone. Happening number 3, the lost announcement. I used to work at a major international airport, handling baggage during the night shift. Most of the time, the terminals were eerily quiet after midnight, with only the hum of machinery and the occasional echo of footsteps. But there was one night I'll never forget. I was in Terminal B, heading toward the staff lounge during my break. The hallway leading to the lounge was long and lined with old storage rooms. Most of them were locked and rarely used. As I walked, I heard an airport announcement echo through the speakers. "Passenger Henry Maxwell, please proceed to Gate 22. Your flight is boarding." At first, I didn't think much of it. Announcements happened all the time, even at odd hours. But as I kept walking, I noticed something strange. The voice on the intercom sounded off, distorted, like it was coming from an old recording. Shrugging it off, I continued toward the lounge. But then I heard it again. "Passenger Henry Maxwell, please proceed to Gate 22. Your flight is boarding." The same message, word for word. I paused and glanced around. There wasn't anyone nearby, and Gate 22 wasn't even in use that night. Feeling uneasy, I radioed a coworker to ask if they'd heard the announcement. The static-filled response came back, "No, man. It's probably a glitch in the system." I decided to check it out. Curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way to Gate 22. The area was dimly lit, with only a few lights illuminating the empty seating area. Everything seemed normal at first. But then, as I turned to leave, I saw movement in the reflection of the glass doors leading to the jet bridge. It looked like a person boarding a plane, dragging a small suitcase behind them. "Hey!" I called out. "You're not supposed to be here." I rushed toward the door, but when I reached it, no one was there. The jet bridge was empty, and the door to the aircraft was locked. My heart raced as I backed away, suddenly feeling like I wasn't alone. As I turned to leave, the intercom crackled again. "Passenger Henry Maxwell, please proceed to Gate 22. Your flight is boarding." I ran out of there and didn't stop until I was back in the staff lounge. I later found out from an older coworker that Henry Maxwell was the name of a man who had died at the airport years ago. He'd had a heart attack while running to catch a flight. Since then, I've heard similar stories from other employees. Whenever his name comes over the intercom, people know to avoid Gate 22. Some passengers never make it to their destination, even if they're not alive to know it. Happening number 4, the Phantom Pilot. 2 years ago, I was traveling back home after a business trip. My flight had been delayed, leaving me stuck at the airport until 4 a.m. To kill time, I wandered through the quiet terminal, where the only sound was the occasional cleaning machine and muffled announcements. As I passed a window overlooking the tarmac, I noticed an older plane parked in an isolated section. It looked out of place, its design was outdated, and the paint on its tail seemed faded. Curious, I walked closer to get a better look. Standing next to the plane was a man in what appeared to be an old-fashioned pilot's uniform. His hat was tilted slightly, and he stood perfectly still, staring at the aircraft. Something about him felt wrong. The uniform was pristine, but it looked decades out of style, and his posture was unnaturally stiff. I waved, trying to get his attention. He didn't move. Thinking he might not have seen me, I leaned against the glass and waved again. That's when he turned to face me. His face was pale, his features sharp but hollow, as if he were more shadow than person. His eyes locked with mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like I shouldn't be there. Suddenly, the lights in the terminal flickered, and when they came back on, he was gone. The plane was still there, but the tarmac was empty. Shaken, I hurried back to my gate. When I mentioned the strange plane to one of the workers at the desk, they gave me a puzzled look. "There's no plane scheduled at that part of the tarmac," they said. Later, as I boarded my flight, I couldn't shake the image of the pilot. When I got home, I searched online and discovered that a similar plane had crashed decades ago, killing everyone on board, including the pilot, whose description eerily matched the man I saw. Since then, I've avoided wandering airports late at night. Some flights, it seems, never reach their final destination, and neither do their crew. Airports are places of endless possibilities, but they also hold countless stories, some inspiring, others unsettling. As you navigate these bustling hubs, it's easy to overlook their quieter, darker moments. But the next time you find yourself in an empty terminal or waiting near a deserted gate, remember these tales. Perhaps you'll hear an unusual announcement, see a shadow where no one should be, or sense that you're not as alone as you thought. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.